Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be going through a list of some adult fantasy books that are not fantasy romance but still have really fantastic subplots. I think for a lot of people, they're not opposed to a really great romance within their fantasy books. They just don't want the romance to take over the plot. They don't want the pining to become the main driving force behind the plot, and they don't want the characters to become really ridiculous and stupid where they're like, even though the world's ending, I love you so much, so let me just think about that. We don't always want that. Sometimes we just want a great fantasy book and people happen to fall in love along the way. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Before I give my list of recommendations, feel free to list yours because I do like dabbling in fantasy romance. I like trying some things here and there, but I think that this is my bread and butter. I think I like really awesome fantasy worlds, everything I was just describing, but with really great romances within them that are just kind of like the less important part of the story. So please, if you have your own recommendations, feel free to leave those. I'm going to kick it off with what is probably a little bit of a surprising recommendation. There's actually two of them, and that would be Warbreaker and Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And the reason that this is kind of surprising potentially is because Sanderson's kind of known for not necessarily writing the best romances, but I think when he does put a little bit more effort into the romantic aspect of the characters' lives, he actually does a really good job. And I think it's because, and part of the reason that we gravitate, so many of us, towards his books and love them so much, is because he really fleshes out his characters and he really makes them distinct. They have distinct personalities, motivations, and so when you see a distinct character start to get to know another character that feels very distinct, and you sort of watch sometimes their personalities clash initially, and then sometimes they immediately seem to get along really well, and you just kind of watch as these two, what feel like real people, get to know each other, and you're like, oh, are they gonna fall in love? And it's kind of cute and sweet, and usually the world is ending in the middle of all this, or there's some really intense stakes, but it's still like the little light within all the darkness. And I think that that's true for a number of his works actually, but the two that stand out as having the most prominent romances, I'd say, would be Warbreaker and Yumi. So Warbreaker, if you don't know, the setup for this one is you follow these two sisters, one who is always trained to fulfill a marriage alliance with a kingdom of people that her country thinks are heathens. But she really doesn't have any other choice, and so she's poised and perfect. And then the other sister is very carefree. She doesn't have any political responsibilities, and so she just kind of is very floaty and happy and silly. And the father just cannot part ways with the poised one, because that's his favorite daughter, and so he's like, I'll just send the flaky one. And she suddenly is finding herself having to marry this man that she knows nothing about. She knows nothing about this kingdom, and she's trying to do the best that she can, and her sister's like, I have to go rescue her. And the sister, it turns out, has no idea what she's doing. All of her training for being proper has not actually trained her at all for what the everyday average person is like in this other kingdom. And within all of that, you also have a character named Lightsong, who is essentially a god among men, but doesn't believe in his own divinity, and he's very ridiculous, and he's dealing with a lot of the court politics, you could say, and he kind of runs into one of the sisters, and then the one that's on the rescue mission runs into a very mysterious man that seems to know a lot about the magic, and it's a lot of fun. I'd say it's one of the most fun of Sanderson's works, to reuse that word. A lot of his books can be very doom and gloom, some of them can be kind of downers, but this one, it's just kind of a good, fun, adventurous time all around, and there is a fun romance within it. And what I think is interesting is that everything I just described, you might not ever guess that there's a great romance within this, but there is one that I think is pretty cute. Before Yumi and the Nightmare Painter was written, on Sanderson's website, it would list the Cosmere for frequently asked questions of where do I start and which one should I read first, and he would have different recommendations depending on what you're looking for, and it did say that if you like a little more romance in your fantasy, then Warbreaker might be the best place to start. But I wonder if that's gonna change, because Yumi truly is such a sweet love story. If you haven't heard too much about this one, we follow these two perspectives that are very different. The personalities of the characters are very different, their lives are very different, and the worlds that they live on are very different. But then one day something happens where one of the characters suddenly is inhabiting the body of the other character, and that character is suddenly in spirit form and nobody else can see her, and they have to figure out what's even going on. And then pretty quickly, Painter is his name, he ends up back in his own world, and now he's in spirit form, and the other character is now inhabiting, it would seem, his body, except for people see her a little differently than they saw him in her world, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. The magic is really cool. The worlds are really cool. It's, I think, one of the most vivid settings that Sanderson's created, and so unique. It's more like sci fantasy, at least one of the perspectives worlds is. And just the characters, the way they get to know each other, how their personalities at first are so different, and they kind of help each other grow, and they push each other, and it's delightful. It's so sweet. I really, really loved Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I'm so glad that I picked it up recently because I just love it so much. After that, we have one that feels a little bit like a grim fairy tale. It's one that I talked about quite often when it first came out, and that would be Nettle and Bone. So one of the things that I didn't need to be criteria for books to be on this list was I didn't need there to be any on-page actual, like, the characters are kissing or more, I'll say. I didn't need that to occur in order for books to end up on this list. I think part of what makes a good romantic subplot is sort of what I described at the beginning of just that building of the relationship between the characters and kind of knowing, even if you don't see them get together on page, you just kind of have this hint of maybe they'll get together. I think they're going to get together. I want them to get together. And I'm not going to reveal whether characters do or do not get together by the end of this one. But I do think that that feeling of like, I think that they could be really cute. They seem cute. That feeling that you have sometimes with certain characters, you're rooting for them. You definitely feel that with the characters in Nettle and Bone. This is so short. It's such a great thing to pick up on a weekend or a Friday night or for a readathon if you like to participate in those. The setup is we follow our main character Mara, whose sister has fulfilled a marriage alliance similar to Warbreaker, and the sister is in a horrible relationship. However, she has to stay married to this terrible man because it is vital for their kingdom's survival that she maintain this marriage, as it is her husband's military that is providing them safety. However, Mara does not want to see her sister have to continue to live in these horrible circumstances, so she sets out to try and form some kind of rescue for her sister, and she wants to take the man out that her sister is married to, but she recognizes, like, I can't just kill that guy because, he's a leader. So she's trying to figure out how she's going to possibly accomplish this, and then along the way, she forms a very silly ragtag group of people to help her, and it's weird to say it's delightful after saying all of the sad things that her sister is enduring, but T. Kingfisher really does have a fantastic writing style. It's very cheeky, it's always very funny, and she has a way of balancing the dark with humor. I think something like Joe Abercrombie, while his writing style is different, I would say, and his stories are different, I think along those lines of that's an example. He writes really awful characters, really awful scenarios, but then at the same time his books are funny. So that concept I think is applicable to this one as well. After that, we have the Drowning Empire trilogy. I'm specifically holding up the last book in the trilogy because in the first one you really don't see any hint of romance. The characters within the story, you have several different perspectives. I'm lying a little bit. There are two characters that are already together, and their relationship is great, and I really like seeing the two of them and how they learn from each other. But as far as like watching characters fall in love, that kind of happens over the course of the trilogy. It never takes over the plot though, and the characters are always putting whatever important things are occurring within their country, that always comes first. So the setup for the Bone Shard Daughter is you have two main perspectives and then some side perspectives. So you have a cast of characters. In the two main perspectives, you have Lynn, who is the daughter of the Emperor, and she is trying to learn Bone Shard magic, and she is also trying to gain her memories back as she lost them at some point. And it is vital that she remember what it is that she lost, as it's going to help her in understanding the Bone Shard magic. The Bone Shard magic kind of makes the whole entire country function. And then after that, we have Jovis, and Jovis's perspective, he's just kind of a happy-go-lucky guy who's looking for his missing wife. And then I always describe him as he stumbles into being heroic. It's very much an accident, except for, you know, with his personality, you're like, I mean, it was bound to happen. And there's also a great animal companion in this trilogy. The magic is really interesting. The first book in particular is kind of a blend of genres, which I thought was really cool. And then I'd say the second and third ones become much more fantasy heavy. And like I said, you see the romance blossom throughout the course of the trilogy. After that, we have a standalone, and that would be The Monsters We Defy. This I have described kind of as like a cozy heist, and it's a little bit different in its setup, as the time period that we're drawing from is a little bit more modern than what we typically find in a lot of fantasy. You're following this young woman who has a deal with a fantasy being, and it would seem that every now and then these beings grant wishes, and you can get what you want from the wish, but it comes with a curse as well. A lot of people end up taking the deal anyway, thinking that the wish that's granted will be worth it, and many a times they find it's not. And our main character has one of these deals, and so you don't really know what her powers are exactly, what she's fully capable of, but she's trying to do what she can to essentially solve some crimes that are occurring. There's some people that occasionally go missing. When they come back, they don't seem like themselves, and she's trying to get to the bottom of it. And along the way, she kind of recruits other people to help her, and one of the people that she recruits, the relationship between her and this person, I really, really enjoyed seeing. I actually was like, that's one of my favorite parts of this book, and I wasn't really expecting that. And then also, almost like a short story way of writing, the author did write, you never really see anything happen. You just know one character's backstory, and then you know the resolution, and that has a little bit of a love story mixed in, and it was probably the most emotional part of the book for me, so I really liked that element. After that, we have one of my favorite books of the year, Godkiller. So I have described this many times as feeling like Witcher in a lot of ways, but instead of hunting monsters, what if Geralt hunted gods? And that's what you get with our main character. And then also, what if within the Witcher series, you got way more of Geralt and Ciri, and way more of that mentor-mentee parental relationship, and that's Godkiller. That's almost always how I describe it, but there is a romance within the story as well, and the characters, when they first meet, there's kind of this tension between them, and the tension isn't necessarily romantic, but I feel like you as the reader, we are so accustomed to seeing the characters at first that are like butting heads, and I think we interpret that as like, oh, it's like sensual because we see it so often. So I was pretty quickly like, what's going on with these two? I feel like something's gonna happen. But I liked the way that the relationship started to build throughout the story. I also just really like the characters as well. So seeing things happen, seeing things build between them was great. Also, Godkiller is just awesome. It's such an awesome story. Last, we have the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. A lot of you know this is one of my favorites. I absolutely adore this series, and there are a number of relationships throughout the series. And yes, that's all I'm going to say about the relationships within the series. I don't want to say anything else. The world itself is truly so epic, so unique, such a fantastic blend of science fiction and fantasy. The world is so weird and so cool and so mysterious, and it takes a while before you feel like your feet are firmly planted on the ground. And then even then, more weird things start to happen. It's such a good trilogy. The general setup, if you've never heard me talk about it, is you follow a few different characters within a world that clearly has been affected by wars of the past. However, the enemies of those wars are unknown to all except for this race of beings known as the Aborans. The Aborans are now dying out, which means all the secrets of these previous wars will die with them. And we have one character who's essentially an archaeologist who's trying to discover more about these previous wars. You have a character who's one of the last Eborans, however, they don't really know any of the secrets as they're too young. And then you follow a witch. And those are our three main characters. And it's so good and so cool and so unique. So that is a list of some fantasy that I think is fantastic, some adult fantasy works that are not fantasy romance, but do, I think, have great fantasy subplots. I'm very curious, like I said at the beginning, what your recommendations are. Please, please, please let me know your recommendations. I would love, love, love to pick up more books like this. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.